Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this lesson on political parties in the United States. My name is Jennifer Blank, and me and Mr. Lincoln are very excited to be sharing this information with you. So without further ado, here we go. If we're going to talk about political parties, we need to first have a definition of precisely what they are. So they are organizations formed to gain political power, okay? Operative term being political power. Their key goals are two, and they are synonymous, or well, not synonymous, but symbiotic and reciprocal with each other. That is to win elections, or rather those are to win elections and to make or control public policy. Now, political parties have been present since our founding, but our founding fathers definitely argued against their development. The primary reason was because they were afraid that this thing called faction would develop. Now, my students should be intimately familiar with this term, but a faction is a group of people, whether it's a minority or a majority. It has a singular political goal that is usually detrimental to the common good of society. This term was coined by James Madison, one of our key founding fathers, the father of our Constitution, and one of our presidents. And this was the primary concern of good government, was to effectively deal with faction, because this was an extraordinarily detrimental thing to Republican government. So our founders were very concerned about this, and they didn't want political parties to happen. But unfortunately, when a bunch of people get together and they don't like a whole other group of people, you have these different groups forming in an effort to combat each other. It seems to be a fundamental part of human nature. So political parties, unfortunately, did develop, and their definition is an organization to form to gain political power. They want to win elections and make and control public policy. Our founders didn't like it, but they have been present since our founding. Before we go any further, let me give you a brief timeline, what I'd like to call a crash course in the historical progression of political parties. So we have our very first political parties, loosely termed the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists. The Anti-Federalists were against ratification of the Constitution. The Federalists were in favor of it. Now, once the Constitution was ratified, we then had to coalesce into different groups. So those groups were the Federalists, who favored strong central government and weak state government, and the Democratic Republicans, who favored strong state government and weak central government. We then transitioned into one-party rule. We had some crazy, massive multi-party madness. Then we transition into dominance of two-party control, and then the two-party system dominates from 1880 to about 1924, but third parties are able to influence presidential elections. In 1924 and 1992, we have again dominance of two-party control. In 1992, Ross Perot brought third parties back with a bang, but they banged out real quick. And from 1992 to 2013, we have a dominance of two-party control, but there has been a resurgence of third-party interests, mainly via the Tea Party. Here you have a compare and contrast chart of the Federalists versus the Democratic Republicans. Again, our first real political parties. Now, as you've undoubtedly noticed, our modern political party names are both present in here, Democrat, Republicans. This party will split, and eventually, over the course of several decades, centuries even, the Democrats and Republicans will form into what we now know them as, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But again, with the Federalists, you want to understand what they were about. So they were about strong central government. They were led by industry and by the wealthy. They had an emphasis on manufacturing, shipping, and trade. Very loose interpretation of the Constitution. They did favor the national bank. They liked protective tariffs, and they were pro-British. Now, the Democratic Republicans, led by Thomas Jefferson, favored strong state governments that were led by the common man, not by industrial giants and the wealthy. There was an emphasis on agriculture as opposed to manufacturing. There was very strict interpretation of the Constitution. They opposed the national bank and protective tariffs, and they were pro-French. The Democrats and Republicans are the two major political parties we have today. Now, Democrats identify as liberal, while the Republicans identify as conservative. But way back when, in the 1800s, that was actually not the case. The Democrats were known as the Dixiecrats. They were the party of slavery. They were the conservatives. They were the ones who wanted to maintain the status quo. The Republicans were the liberals. They were the party of anti-slavery. They were also known as the radical Republicans during the period of Reconstruction. And they wanted to ban slavery completely and achieve full political equality for all freed slaves. So as you've undoubtedly noticed, or as I hope you've noticed, that this is opposite of what is in existence today. Today, the Democrats are liberals. Okay, and the Republicans are conservative, but originally that was not the case. Now, on the next slide, I'm going to talk about what the key ideas are of the two major parties. So you see some charts in front of you. I have two concept maps on the right-hand side and then a little graphic on the left comparing Democrats and Republicans. There are obviously way more issues than what's depicted over here, but this gives you a general idea of what Democrats are in favor of versus what Republicans like. Democrats are pro-choice, Republicans are pro-life. Democrats are pro-same-sex marriage, Republicans are anti-same-sex marriage. Democrats like gun control, Republicans do not. And if you turn your attention to the Democratic graphic in the top right here, you can see what key issues that the Democrats like to talk about and are in favor of. So Democrats like pro-social programs, programs to help deal with poverty, programs to keep people out of poverty and to get people out of it. Things like welfare, Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. Democrats tend to lean liberal. They like regulation of the economy. They are pro-gay marriage, less emphasis on the military. They are pro-choice, and they are primarily secular. This is in stark contrast to the Republicans, who identify primarily as conservative. They want less government regulation of the economy. They are anti-gay marriage. They would like more emphasis on the military. They are pro-life, tend to be religious, and would like less emphasis on social programs. I think it's important to spend a couple of minutes talking about political ideology. You see the definition here. Political ideology is a comprehensive set of beliefs about the nature of people and the role of government. And as you can see here, there's a spectrum. All right, on the left tend to lean the Democrats. Those tend to be the liberals. On the right are the Republicans, tend to be conservatives, and there are the moderates or independents. Now, I really want you to pay attention here because this is where the vast majority of people fall. Very few are extreme left or extreme right, even though that's what we see in our politics. I'm going to talk about why that is in a few minutes. But I really want you to make a note of this, that the vast majority of the American people are centrists. They are moderates, they are independents. They don't particularly care for extreme left or extreme right. All right, so third parties and why do they matter? Let's bring up a little graphic and talk about why they matter. So third parties can bring issues to national attention that maybe ordinarily would not have been such a big deal. Prime example, recent example is the debate over the national debt and the fact that the government was shut down. Love them or hate them, the Tea Party folks were able to effectively get their concern about the national debt brought to the national forefront. They can also influence the outcome of elections by getting votes from other parties. A primary example is the 1982 election where President Bush was running against then Governor Clinton. Governor Clinton actually won that election largely because Ross Perot, the third-party candidate, siphoned votes away from the Republican Party. It also presents an alternative to the two major parties, and it can influence policy by influencing the public and the two major parties. A historical example of that is the Progressive Party, or was the Progressive Party, of the early 1900s, and evidence of their reforms are still present today. Now, I do want to draw your attention to another graphic that comes from the 1800s. This was from the Whig Party that presented an alternative to the Democrats and the Republicans. And their graphic was vote Whig. They couldn't possibly be worse. So one argument that people give me that they don't vote third party is because it's a waste of a vote. And then I ask them, well, how you feel about the other two party candidates, the two major parties. And they're like, well, I don't really like them. They annoy me. You know, they're too extreme, and I'm not a fan. And I'm like, well, isn't that a waste of a vote if you're voting for somebody that you don't really like that much? So if you're going to waste a vote anyway, right, if it's going to be a waste, you might as well go for somebody that you actually like. Now, there are options out there for the American people, and I want to draw your attention to this other graphic here that represents some examples of third-party candidates in the United States, or third parties rather, in the United States. So there are options, ladies and gentlemen. You need to expand your horizons. If you don't like the two parties, then you need to be active in getting attention for somebody other than the two parties. But if you continue to vote and participate with those two parties only, then you are perpetually reducing the choices that you have in your voting life. I want to talk for just a second about primaries versus general elections. Everybody votes in the general election, and there you really have a Republican and a Democratic candidate. But what people don't realize is in a primary election, you have a Republican primary and a Democratic primary, okay? And you will have candidate 1, 2, 3, 4. You could have more than that, but I'm just going to go with 4 now just for brevity's sake. Okay, so in the Republican primary, all these 4 people are Republicans, and they are running to see which of them is going to be in this position. Okay, and the Democrats is the same thing. All these 4 people are Democrats, and they are running to see which of them will be in this position. So if you are not registered for a party and you do not vote in the primary, your general election choices are limited to only 2. Whereas if you are registered for the primary and participate, you actually have a great deal more choice here, okay? Elections are determined by the primaries. If you do not participate in primaries, you are leaving yourself out of a key aspect of political participation. I always tell people it doesn't matter which party you register for, but you should register for a party so that you can participate in the primary elections and help determine who represents the party in the general. It is very, very important that people pay more attention to primaries because primaries determine who's going to eventually be president. Now that we've talked a little bit about primary and general elections and something about a little bit of information about the political parties, let's look at party identification and why certain people, or rather which people, tend to identify with which party. The graph on the bottom right shows you party identification based on income. This is the lowest income bracket. This is the highest income bracket. So based off of this graphic, we can come to the conclusion that lower income folks tend to vote Democrat, higher income folks tend to vote Republican. But independents are pretty stable across the board. It's not shifting very much. All right, so that's an interesting thing to note. Now, if I were a political operative, if I were running a campaign, I would try to target these people here. These people are pretty set. These people are pretty set. If I had extra money and time, I might try to go after these people, but my main demographic that I'm plugging to is here. Why is that? Because the lines are very close to each other. That means that there's no strong party loyalty either way. So this gives me the best chance to swipe some independent votes and to maybe turn some folks around and get them over to my side. So if I'm a political campaigner, I want these guys. Now, over here, this graph, a trend in party identification, this was in 2009. Or our focus is 2009. It's that green line over there. And as you can see, the Republican identification dropped a little bit. I can't imagine that had anything to do with the fact that Barack Obama was elected in 2009. Gee, I wonder. So you have a little bit of uptick in independent and Democrats. But when we look at this graph down here, right below it, you see Republicans are ticking back up. All right. Now they went from about, 22, 23 back up to 28%. Okay. So that's an interesting thing to know. That just a few short years later, the Democrats are down and the Republicans are back up. I want to point out to you Hispanics because they are the largest growing minority and they are poised to become a very, very important and decisive voting bloc moving forward. Right now, they're mostly independent, but there are some Republicans and there are some Democrats. Democrats are in the lead right now, but this is why both parties are going like gangbusters trying to get the Hispanic vote because most of it is up for grabs. More data. So I want to draw your attention to this graphic up here on the top left. The Republican Party, according to this, has about 55 million voters registered. A Democratic Party has about 72. Why are anybody but Democrats getting elected? Well, because Democrats don't get out to vote as much as the Republicans do. The Republican base is a lot more intense and a lot more active. The chart down at the bottom left indicates voting based on religion. Based on this graphic, we can draw the conclusion that religious voters tend to lean Republican, with the exception of black Protestants, where they almost uniformly go Democrat. Now, if I'm a political operative and I want to figure out who I'm going to campaign towards, I'm going to focus my campaign here on this age bracket because party identification is a little fluid and it's in the middle. So I'm going to go after these guys because that gives me the best chance of getting them over to my side and of getting more voters. So what did we learn? We learned about the definition of political parties as well as the goals. We talked a little bit about the two major parties and what their views are, and we also learned about the influence third parties can have. We went over what the definition of political ideology is and explained where that falls and how that factors into the two major parties. We also discussed some voter data. So here on the right, you have the ideas of the Republicans and the ideas of the Democrats. But I want to draw your attention real quick to this graphic down at the bottom. These are the types of voters who tend to vote Democrat. These are the types of voters who tend to vote Republican. And our data bears this out. I hope you learned what you needed to, and I will see you in the next video.